Tonight at 10, the FBI announces a new investigation into emails relating to Hillary Clinton, less than 2 weeks before Election Day.
Wow, what a beautiful day in Cedar Rapids!
At a rally tonight, Mrs. Clinton ignored it entirely, but the move reignites an issue that's dogged her campaign. A Republican rival who's repeatedly dubbed her Crooked Hillary pounced on the new turn of events.
Hillary Clinton's corruption is on a scale we have never seen before.
With Mrs. Clinton's team tonight questioning the timing of the FBI's statement, we'll be assessing the impact the investigation could have on the race for the White House. Also tonight, Uber taxi drivers win workers' rights. Unions say it's a victory for thousands classed as self-employed when they shouldn't be. Syrian rebels launch a major push to break the government siege in the city of Aleppo. A breakthrough in the treatment of cystic fibrosis. A trial of a new drug produces startling results. And protecting the penguins, the creation of the world's largest maritime reserve in Antarctica.
In the south, dicing with death, the diet pills being sold online which can have tragic consequences. And how to beat the bottleneck. Hundreds turn out to hear about plans for one of our most congested roads.
Good evening. With just 11 days to go before the US presidential election, there's a dramatic development that could have serious consequences for Hillary Clinton's campaign. The FBI announced this evening that it's looking at new information relating to emails while she was Secretary of State. It had previously closed its investigation into her, criticising her for holding classified information on a private email server, but clearing her of criminal action. The Democratic candidate, who was campaigning tonight, stuck doggedly to a pre-prepared script and said nothing. But her team has questioned the timing of the release. And her Republican rival, Donald Trump, moved quickly to praise the FBI and declared she must be prevented from taking what he described as her criminal scheme into the Oval Office. Well, our chief correspondent, Gavin Hewitt, is outside the FBI headquarters in Washington for us tonight. Gavin.
Rita, quite simply, the Clinton campaign is furious, saying it's extraordinary that this should come out just 11 days before a presidential campaign. And another indicator of the seriousness or the potential seriousness of this came from the White House, where they put out a statement saying that President Obama still had every faith in Hillary Clinton. This is a significant moment in the American election campaign, with just 11 days to go to polling. Hillary Clinton was arriving in Iowa, her campaign in good spirits. Then they learned that the FBI is carrying out a new investigation into her emails as part of its probe into her use of a private server. The FBI has discovered new emails and wants to see if any of them contained classified information. Donald Trump was in New Hampshire, and he immediately pounced on the news. For weeks he had based much of his campaign on referring to her as Crooked Hillary.
They are reopening the case into her criminal and illegal conduct that threatens the security of the United States of America.
The Republican candidate went on to say this is bigger than Watergate. The news came in a letter from the director of the FBI to members of Congress. I agreed, he wrote, that the FBI should take appropriate investigative steps designed to allow investigators to review these emails to determine whether they contained classified information. The FBI says it doesn't know whether the material is significant or how long its investigation will take. This inquiry goes back to the time Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State and used a private email server. In July, after a long inquiry, the FBI closed the case.
Although there is evidence of potential violations of the statutes regarding the handling of classified information, our judgment is that no reasonable prosecutor would bring such a case.
The issue of the emails surfaced during the presidential debates, and Hillary Clinton apologized for how she had handled her official emails.
I made a mistake using a private email.
That's for sure.
And if I had to do it over again, I would obviously do it differently.
At every campaign stop, however, Donald Trump has made Hillary Clinton's honesty and trustworthiness a key issue.
Let's knock out crooked Hillary Clinton. Crooked is a $3 bill. She is as crooked as a $3 bill.
At a rally in Iowa, Hillary Clinton did not mention the FBI inquiry. She ignored shouted questions from reporters, but this development is likely to dominate the closing days of the campaign.
Well, we'll go back to Gavin in just a moment, but first to Kim Katas, who's with the Clinton campaign in Cedar Rapids in Iowa. And Kim, a very difficult day for the Clinton team. What's the reaction been?
Yes, indeed. The news broke while we were mid-air, and it caught the campaign off guard when we landed. In fact, when we were on the plane, they were sounding very confident, briefing us on the state of the race. They said they weren't feeling complacent, but confident. They said she wasn't quite yet measuring the drapes at the White House because, get this, they told us she is superstitious. And there you have it. We land and there's a statement from the FBI about emails yet again. Even though we now know that this is not about emails from her or not about emails that were on her private server, it does reignite the whole question about transparency when it comes to Hillary Clinton. Now, the statement from the FBI was very vaguely worded, and it's unclear whether it's going to change the race. But some damage has already been done with all these headlines swirling. Now, as you saw in this report by Gavin Hewitt, she didn't mention this issue here. But if there's one thing that the campaign has learned, is to avoid their usual defensive crouch. And a statement from the campaign has made very clear that they find the timing extraordinary. And they believe, or they indicate in that statement, that they believe the FBI simply came under pressure from Republicans. And they called on the FBI director to do what is right by American voters and clarify as quickly as possible the details of what they're looking into.
And Gavin, what is the likely impact of this news on the campaign overall?
Well, firstly, it has to be said nothing has been proven. We don't know whether these emails contain classified information or whether they are significant. The emails didn't come from Hillary Clinton's server. They came from Anthony Weiner, a former congressman whose wife worked with Hillary Clinton. But all of this is a gift for Donald Trump. At rally after rally, he says that she's a liar sitting atop a criminal enterprise. He will now be able to say to people, how can you possibly vote for somebody who's under investigation? On the other hand, the Clinton campaign will put huge pressure publicly on the FBI and say, look, clear this up quickly. If there is something there, get it out. If there isn't, we would like Hillary Clinton to be cleared. All of this will be fought out over the next few days. But for Donald Trump, this is a day they were texting and saying it's been one of the best days of the campaign. Rita.
OK, Gavin, thank you. Gavin Hewitt there and Kim Katas with the Clinton campaign in Iowa. Drivers who work for the cab service Uber are entitled to holiday pay, the minimum wage and other employment rights, according to a landmark ruling. Unions say the tribunal decision, handed down this afternoon, could be the start of a significant shift in workplace rights for tens of thousands of workers. Uber has said it'll appeal the decision, as our business correspondent Simon Gompertz reports.
Uber drivers like Asif get their jobs via a smartphone app. They're pioneers of the digital age. But while Uber is Asif's main source of income, he's classed as self-employed, which is why he says Uber's been denying him normal workers' rights.
I don't have a control on the work. I have an app. The app allows me. The app gives me the job. I do not generate it. I got work from Uber. I do not generate it. So how could I be classified as self-employed? Because I don't have no control.
Uber has 40,000 drivers in Britain, but they're not employees with full employees' rights. They're self-employed or independent contractors, as Uber calls them, who have to fend for themselves. But the drivers who brought this case say they should be workers, which is legally somewhere in the middle, entitled to rest breaks and holiday pay and a national minimum wage.
And today, an employment tribunal decided the drivers and the union behind them were right.
This is the most important employment law decision of the decade, without doubt. Its implications reach far, far beyond Uber. They reach right out into the economy in general, and they clarify the position, they level the playing field up.
Uber is no stranger to protests. Traditional taxi drivers around the world accuse it of driving down fares and standards. But it's determined. It said it would appeal, and that the overwhelming majority of drivers who use the Uber app want to keep the freedom and flexibility of being able to drive when and where they want. Yet today's decision will reverberate around the new generation of delivery companies, minicabs and courier firms which use smartphones to mobilise an army of self-employed people.
They're going to need to look very carefully at the case to decide whether they can distinguish their business operating model from Uber's, or whether it's sufficiently similar that they're now at a substantial risk of having to pay the minimum wage, provide paid holiday, sick pay and so on.
So pending the appeal, Asif should get his workers' rights, and the rules could change anyway, because the government's commissioned an independent review into whether employment law now needs to be updated. Simon Gompertz, BBC News.
Rebel groups in Syria have launched a major offensive to try to break the government siege of Aleppo, the city at the heart of Syria's civil war. Hundreds of missiles have been fired at government-held positions by rebel groups in a coordinated assault. Our Middle East correspondent Quentin Somerville has been following events from neighbouring Lebanon, and he sent this report.
In Aleppo, a call to arms, and God willing, say these rebels, we will soon be in the heart of the city. They brought with them plenty of firepower, hundreds of rockets targeting the regime-controlled West. But they have something just as powerful, a new unity. Resupplied moderate rebels and hardline Islamists working together. And here they are using a favourite jihadist tactic: suicide car bombs, but in numbers far greater than before. At least half a dozen hit pro-government positions. The criminal regime has besieged our brothers, said this commander. They've committed continuous and daily massacres. We will free our brothers. In a city divided, East and West Aleppo almost looked the same today. 15 people were killed by rebel shells landing in the west and more than 100 injured.
My children are under the rubble. They are still under the rubble. The building collapsed. Oh my God.
Blood and war are this city's common ground. Aleppo's been torn apart. Unified, the rebels have more weapons and more ground troops than before. They pressed their advantage. By the afternoon, here in the Assad neighbourhood, they'd broken through government lines. In the east, as this mobile phone footage shows, they came out to celebrate. Until recently, Russian and Syrian airstrikes killed hundreds here. There's been a pause in those attacks, and Russia says they won't restart yet. Aleppo's fate and that of Syria's vicious civil war are joined together. For now, it's the rebels who have the upper hand. Quentin Somerville, BBC News, Beirut.
Well, meanwhile, a major offensive is continuing against Islamic State in neighbouring Iraq. Today, the United Nations accused IS of using tens of thousands of civilians as human shields in the besieged city of Mosul. It said men, women and children were being moved to areas under attack from advancing government forces. Our correspondent Shaima Khalil has been hearing the story of one family who escaped the horror of life under IS when their village near Bashika was liberated.
Ashraf and his family have been living in this refugee camp for a few days now. For the first time in 2 years, they're able to sleep well, without fear. They'd escaped their village near Mosul when the Iraqi forces came in. But life under the so-called Islamic State has taken its toll, especially on Ashraf, who was abducted by the extremists.
They took me to a house and hit me with sticks and thick electric cables. They said, "Your brothers are with the Peshmerga, the Kurdish soldiers." I told them, "My brothers are drivers, not fighters." But they didn't stop. They put a knife to my throat. They fired over my head and tortured me with electric shocks. It lasted for hours. I thought I was going to die.
Nahla told me she had to beg for her son's life.
His father and I followed the car that took him. I went up to the fighters and said, "I want my son." They said they were going to kill him. I said, "My son hasn't done anything." I was so frightened. My heart was going to stop. I said, "Shoot me, but let my son go." Then I heard the gunshots.
This is the Shahood family home. The IS fighters seized it to use it as a base to fight from.
ISIS are criminals. You can get fined, lashed or even killed for the simplest thing. They forced us to grow birds and to go 5 times a day to the mosque. They call for the destruction of America and Britain.
Sabrine was out feeding the cows when she was shot in earlier fighting. She's been paralyzed for 3 years now and is in desperate need of medical help.
I used to watch TV to distract myself from my condition, but they came and took the TV and mobile phones away. It was suffocating. I would lie there 24 hours with nothing to do.
Now the UN says IS have abducted thousands of civilians from around Mosul to use them as human shields. Families here may have escaped the extremists' grip, but many more are suffering the terror of life under IS in a besieged city. Shaima Khalil, BBC News, Khazar, northern Iraq.
Let's take a look at some of the day's other news stories now. 2 children have died after a house fire in Birmingham. Their father is in a critical condition in hospital after being discovered in a burnt-out car in Staffordshire. Police say no one else is being sought in connection with the incident, which is being treated as suspected arson. 17-year-old Ronan Hughes died last year after being tricked into sharing intimate images of himself online. Today, a man appeared in court in Romania on charges relating to the County Tyrone teenager's death. The High Court in Belfast has rejected 2 legal challenges to the UK leaving the EU. The cases were brought by a cross-party group of Northern Ireland politicians who claimed the Stormont Assembly should be allowed a vote on whether Brexit negotiations should begin. And meanwhile, the boss of Thai Food Tea says the effect of the EU referendum has been a disaster for his company because of the fall in the value of sterling. Somnath Saha told the BBC that Thai Food is losing hundreds of thousands of pounds every month, and customers will end up having to pay more for their tea. A new treatment of drugs targeting the cause of cystic fibrosis has been shown to slow lung damage by more than 40%. It's called Orkambi and was tested on more than 1,000 patients over a 2-year period. But it's not yet available on the NHS and costs more than £100,000 per patient. Our medical correspondent Fergus Walsh reports.
I was always very pale, short and skinny, very tired. And now I look like everyone else and I can run like I've never been able to before.
Clara's lungs used to be so clogged up, this sort of exercise would have instantly made her breathless. The 15-year-old from Somerset has cystic fibrosis, but since starting the Orkambi trial 3 years ago, her health has dramatically improved.
It's just amazing. I'm transformed, I think, like a butterfly out of a cocoon. My lungs work so much better. My lung function, which is how they measure how your lungs are working at the hospital, has just gone right up. I've put on weight. I have grown a lot in the last year or so, and I feel a lot more normal and healthy.
Cystic fibrosis is a serious, progressive genetic condition, and only half of people affected make it into their 40s. DNA errors mean they produce a thick, sticky mucus that clogs and inexorably damages the lungs. The new drug therapy aims to correct the underlying cause of cystic fibrosis, altering the microscopic machinery in the lungs so they produce a runnier mucus. Studies suggest it slows irreversible lung damage by more than 40% over 2 years, and patients were less likely to need hospital treatment.
Previously, all the treatments for CF treated the symptoms of CF, and while we need those, such as antibiotics and mucolytic agents, they are not going to ever be called a cure. So potentially we're on the right path now for the cure.
The trouble is, Orkambi costs £104,000 a year. The health watchdog NICE has turned it down for NHS patients, saying it's not value for money. Clara relies on a whole raft of medications, like this nebulizer, to keep her healthy. She knows the Orkambi tablets she takes are not a cure, but hopes, despite the costs, the NHS will eventually offer the drug to other cystic fibrosis patients. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
French officials say they finally relocated the last of the migrants in the camp at Calais known as the Jungle. Around 6,000 people have been removed to locations around France since the operation to clear the camp began on Monday. Our Europe correspondent Damien Grammaticus was watching as the last buses departed.
This is how you clear a jungle. You smash it, then burn it. The end for Calais' shantytown. A few child refugees were still there this morning, like Hassan from Afghanistan, unwilling to abandon this place and the hopes vested in it.
We want to go to UK. We take all kind of danger. We face danger. So if they're gonna refuse us, so we'll be also spending the nights in the jungle.
Starting is about 1 o'clock. You follow Christian. Thanks so much.
But today, French authorities gave those still here a choice: leave or face arrest. This is the slow, final emptying of the jungle. Some have held on even as the bulldozers have moved in all week, but now they're giving up, taking the offer to get on those buses, get relocated elsewhere. And leading this last exodus was the man who struggled to rid his town of the jungle, Calais' police chief, a little overwhelmed.
Of course it's difficult, of course.
Difficult as in emotional?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Because you work with human.
Yeah.
I mean, it's human. You work, sometimes we fight against them, and sometimes we help them, and sometimes we secure them.
Show me, so this is your last picture?
Yeah, the last picture.
Of the jungle?
Yes, the jungle.
It's finished now?
Finished, jungle finished.
It's all gone?
Yeah.
Most left with barely a glance at their old home, and just time for some goodbyes for the jungle's children from those who've cared for them.
We don't know how their age will be assessed. That's happening right behind me, and I don't know who is the person and how qualified they are to make that assessment.
But the promise is all asylum claims will be heard. They've crossed continents, and still their journey isn't done. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Calais.
Now, the Ross Sea in Antarctica is one of the last great wildernesses and home to some of the world's most diverse species, including most of its penguins and whales. Now, after years of talks, it's been declared a protected area, the world's largest. Commercial fishing will be banned, as will mining, but the protections won't last forever, as our science editor David Schuckman explains.
The waters around Antarctica may be icy, but they're teeming with life. This is one of the world's least disturbed stretches of ocean. But because it's so rich biologically, it's attracting the attention of fishing fleets. So the protection agreed today is seen as hugely important.
In the 25 years that I've been working in polar marine biology, I would say this is the biggest day. It's a massive decision, and British Antarctic Survey are delighted that all the hard work for more than 5 years by 24 countries have resulted in this incredible decision.
Tiny creatures known as krill are the foundation of life in the Southern Ocean. And the aim of the new marine protected area is to safeguard the entire food chain. There's still so much in this bizarre world that remains a mystery, even after a century of exploration. For scientists, it's a huge challenge trying to understand what makes this remote and unique ecosystem tick. And I once saw that for myself as I joined a team of biologists twisting through the iceberg. So will the New Deal protect all this? It will last 35 years. Some say that's not enough. But for the campaigner Lewis Pugh, who even swam in the Antarctic waters to highlight the issue, the deal is a big step forward.
For me, this is an issue about justice. This is not about swimming. Yes, it's about the environment, but most of all, it's about justice. It's about ensuring that we look after our environment for our children and our grandchildren, that there's justice between generations.
What's remarkable about the agreement for this remotest corner of the planet is that there's been some very rare harmony between Russia and the West. Far from the disputes over Syria or Ukraine, governments have looked at Antarctica and decided that it's just too precious to put at risk. David Shukman, BBC News.
Well, that's all from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a very good night. Bye-bye.